Good evening, one and all connected for the webinar today. I am Dr. Jitendra Kumar Mishra, Director of Jaipuria School of Business and moderator for today's discussion. On behalf of Samarthya Teachers Training Academy for Research, we call it STAR, Jaipuria School of Business and Jaipuria Institute of Management, Ghaziabad, I extend a hearty welcome to you all. We all know that the recently unveiled National Education Policy 2020 is being widely talked about due to transformational changes it promises. The structural reforms brought by the education policy is the culmination of the inclusive consultation process and seeking suggestion that it has followed at the various stages of the policy making. This policy, being ambitious, bold and transformational, has created enough curiosity among the stakeholders as to what is going to happen, how the proposed changes in the policy going to affect the individual interests and the interests of the larger mass. Thus, to provide a better understanding and to bring lucidity on various provisions of the new education policy, STAR, JSB and JIM have jointly organized today's webinar on National Education Policy 2020 Perspective, Issues and Pathways. Ladies and gentlemen, STAR is an initiative of Jaipuria School of Business to empower educators from all the domains of academics and across the geography. It organizes a variety of training programs on the topical themes, and its training programs are being very well received by the faculty within India and abroad. Now let us come to the discussion. Though the current panel does not need any introduction, but to keep up with the customary, I would like to quickly introduce to you the members of the panel, which we have got to enlighten us on the new national education policy. I take immense pleasure in introducing Sri Shishir Jaipuria ji, Chairman of Seth Anandram Jaipuria Educational Society, and an eminent educationist who is also co-chair of FICCI Arise, the educational wing of FICCI. We welcome you to webinar, sir.
Thank you.
It is my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Vinaysheel Gautamji, a legend in the world of management thought and practice, who is internationally acclaimed institution builder. As a management expert, he has facilitated management development activities in Germany, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and some of the finest organizations in India. His expertise has been sought in some of the key policy formulation activities of government and the corporate sector. He has been on the board of various Indian and non-Indian organizations. He has addressed international audiences from Montreal to Melbourne and from Caracas to Tokyo. He has been visiting faculty to Institute of Developing Economies, Japan. Widely published, he is a recipient of several fellowships and many recognitions, including Lifetime Achievement Awards. Among other distinctions, Dr. Gautam has served as the founder director of IIM Kozhikode. He has been leader to the consulting team of IIM Shillong. He has been first head of management department, IIT Delhi, first honorary dean, KPMG Academy, senior MD and principal economic advisor, Probity India Limited. He has represented India inter alia in the activities of UNESCO and Asian Productivity Organization, Economic Conclave, Morocco. He is President Emeritus of ISTD. Sir, we are honored to have you on the panel today. Let me welcome Professor Gautam Sinha ji, who has been the founding director of IIM Kashipur and director of Lal Bahadur Shastri Institute of Management, Delhi. He is currently the Vice Chancellor of IMS Unison University, Dehradun. He is a perennial student, having earned his BTech from IIT ISM in 1990 and PhD from IIT Kharagpur in 2001. He called himself as an accidental academician, as having worked in for L&T and SAIL for nearly 25 years. He shifted to academics in 2002. He has been on the Society of IIM Lucknow, board of IIIT Allahabad, and on the board of Navratna PSU, Shipping Corporation of India Limited. He is also on the board of a very well-known startup called Analytics Safe at Work. With immense pleasure, we welcome you to the webinar, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Azhar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Next, I am pleased to welcome Professor Raj Singh Ji, Chief Executive of Arka EduServe Bengaluru, currently an advisor to 5 universities across India. He has been Vice Chancellor of Ansal University, Gurgaon, Rayat Bahar University, Mohali, GD Goenka University, Gurgaon, and MET University, Gwalior. He has held numerous academic positions across the institutions. The list is very long. Here, as a TEDx speaker, Professor Raj Singh is known for his innovative approach in higher education and has founded a unique high school in rural Rajasthan. It's indeed our honor to have you with us today, sir. We welcome you to the webinar. We also have with us Dr. Davinder Narang, Director, Jaipuria Institute of Management, Ghaziabad. We welcome you to the webinar, sir.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, let me request Sri Shishir Jaipuria ji for his welcome address and opening remark. Sir.
Good evening and namaskar. I take great pleasure in welcoming you all to the panel discussion on National Education Policy 2020 with regard to the perspective, issues and pathways organized by STAR, Samarth Teachers Training Academy of Research, in collaboration with Jaipuria School of Business. I am especially grateful to our esteemed co-panelists, Professor Vinaysheel Gautam, Professor Gautam Sinha, and Professor Raj Singh for joining us here today. They will share their perspectives on the subject that is extremely relevant, has contemporary flavor, and will have significant impact at the national level in the context of higher education. My congratulations to the Director, Jaipuria School of Business, Dr. Jitendra Mishra, Director, Jaipuria Institute of Management, Dr. Narang, as well as the Academic Council of STAR for organizing this webinar. STAR Academy was launched 1.5 months back and is focused on teachers training, holding webinars, and disseminating research and insights in different verticals of education in order to empower teachers and to ensure that they are able to build skills and competencies required to improve learning outcomes of students in schools and colleges. The Academy is driven by the strong belief that high-quality teachers truly shape the future of children and hence the future of any nation. A fully structured and continuous professional development plan which covers latest pedagogies, formative and adaptive assessment of learning outcomes, competency-based learning, leadership skills, etc., are integral part of its training program. Friends, the National Education Policy 2020 promises to replace and transform our education system. The policy, which has come out after a gap of 34 years, lays strong emphasis on building 21st century skills, create a paradigm of inclusive and equitable quality education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. This is in consonance in meeting the targets reflected in Sustainable Development Goals. The policy clearly identifies the problems currently being faced by the higher education institutions and spells out the changes that are required to address them. It lays emphasis on development of cognitive skills and learning outcomes, moving towards multidisciplinary undergraduate education, focusing on autonomy for faculty and institutions so that they are encouraged to engage in constant innovation. The thrust is to create large universities or knowledge hubs which can enable the students to become well-rounded and have skills which are not only focused on core business but are flexible and are inspired by growth mindset. Friends, the fourth industrial revolution has created demand for new jobs, which has been catalyzed by breakthrough advances in automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, data analytics, and robotics. This will impact all manufacturing and service industry, namely finance, banking, retail, transport, energy, media, entertainment, healthcare, education, etc. To be able to meet the new business models, students will have to become digitally savvy as all businesses will be carried on both physical as well as digital space. The students have to be prepared for the physical and digital ecosystem and have to acquire skills in computer literacy, online marketing and social media, apart from soft skills like leadership, communication, creativity, problem solving, as well as attitudinal and behavioral skills. Our family ventured into education in 1945 when my late grandfather, Padma Bhushan Mangturam Jaipuria, started an undergraduate college in Calcutta. At that time, education system was standardized and was largely based on the concept of rote learning. Since then, the whole education system has gone through a major transformation with the demands of the industry constantly changing and the emphasis being given to sharpen skill of the students. The higher education institutes today have to be more agile, more dynamic and adaptable as the job market is constantly evolving. According to World Economic Forum, the demand for new jobs will be in marketing, sales and content production, demand for artificial intelligence, data, cloud computing, and product development, as well as in the care economy. People will be changing jobs more frequently, living longer, and will have to be prepared to continuously enhance their skills as the lifespan of companies will be shorter. According to OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, estimates 14% of all jobs across the countries which are routine and repetitive will be automated, and another 32% will be radically transformed by technologies which are not known today. The McKinsey Global Institute envisages that 20 to 30% of the working population in developed countries will be engaged in technology-enabled on-demand work, and that number will continuously grow. All these changes calls for deeper understanding of the future of jobs, global knowledge, and teaching has to be more case study based so that the students can become effective problem solvers. The new education policy also has a vision to improve the gross enrollment ratio of students in higher education from 26.3% in 2018 to 50% in 2035. While the objective is laudable, it will require strong political will, and both central and state governments shall have to substantially increase their budget and create a conducive ecosystem for the private capital to invest in this sector aggressively. We have seen in the recent past huge foreign direct investment being made in edutech companies, and they have been able to scale up their outreach exponentially. During COVID times, when the colleges are physically closed, the e-learning platforms within our country, as well as those that have global presence, have been able to penetrate the Indian market significantly. Today, Byju's has over 4.5 million students enrolled in their different programs. It is the most appropriate time for the government to encourage investment in education sector by formalizing it and removing impediments that breed malpractices. Large investment in physical infrastructure, in extensive use of technology, in research, teachers training, midday meals, etc., will be constantly required, for which a time-bound action plan with requisite funds will be required. A clear-cut action plan with timelines will be essential to implement the plan and meet the vision of the policy. One of the areas in which our institutions of higher education lag behind their counterparts in developed countries relates to research. Also, absence of a system that encourages higher scholastic achievements and its application to the real world situation operates as a strong disincentive to high quality research. While the policy does lay emphasis on research, we will have to address this issue in a more holistic manner and create a viable industry academia nexus for mutually beneficial system. Before I conclude, I must compliment the government for the progressive and forward-looking policy which is built on pillars of access, quality, equality, affordability, and accountability. It also clearly demarcates the four different functions of regulatory systems, that is regulation, accreditation, funding, and academic standards, so that they work independently and ensure to achieve their respective objectives. With the thrust given in the policy for maximizing use of digital technology and the various platforms created by the Ministry of Education to create content and dissemination of knowledge through various apps and tools, I am confident that the quality education would become available to all sections of the society. It will help in addressing the digital divide. In the last 5 or 6 years, our country has witnessed penetration in usage of mobile phones and internet, which will provide access to students in remote areas and create opportunities for them to meet their aspirations. I am confident that the new education policy will build the foundation stone for our country to be self-reliant and transform India into a vibrant knowledge hub rooted in Indian ethics and values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for wonderfully setting up the tone for the today's session by pointing out the skill requirement and some of the salient feature of the new education policy as well. Thank you very much. Now to start with, I would request Professor Vinaysheel Gautamji for his initial remark. Let me tell that we are going to have a format where each of our panelists will initially put up their initial thought for about 10 minutes. and then we would take up the questions from the audience, because there are two purposes of this webinar. One is to educate the audience for the on the provisions of the new education policy, and also to address their questions. So we would welcome questions, and we would be happy addressing your questions, because that is what you are going to take away out of this webinar. So now, without further ado, I would request Sri Vinayshil Gautam ji to please open the forum by his initial remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Honorable Shishir Jaipuria Sahab, other co-panelists, the organizer, Dr. Devendra Narang, and friends in the audience and colleagues. I don't know how many of you would recall having read Carol Lewis's classic book, Alice in the Wonderland. And Alice and the Cheshire Cat were in a conversation, and Alice asked, "How do I get on the right road? Which is the right road?" To which the cat is supposed to have replied, "If you don't know where to get, every road is the right road." Now, mercifully, for the first time in a national education policy frame, we have a destination built up, a scenario built up where we want to get at the end of the policy travel. The way I understand the destination is that it is ending up in a trough where there are fading boundaries at work. Not only are there fading boundaries at work, but there is a rise of information as the key to empowerment and innovate. We are not lost in the usual slogans which this country has faced progressively through the decades and with higher intensity in the last 30, 40 years, and I'm not going to waste time elaborating upon it. My task of dwelling upon the route to that destination is made easier by the remarks of Mr. Jaipuria, who covered a lot of ground in course of his remarks, but most significantly, it was a pleasure to hear someone for the first time in the series of webinars which have been held on national education policy to have highlighted a basic fundamental framework of the policy, that is separation of the functions of the standard setting, funding, accreditation, and regulation. And this itself is a revolution in the present scheme of things. Because of this overlap in these four functions, many things did not grow as powerfully as they would have. So what I notice is the education policy is clear about the destination where it wants to lead the country. It is also well poised to create a framework of operation. Therefore, the next question which arises is, what is that we are trying to set right, and what is the context in which we will be operating? Well, the first context is there is no new normal. I know the media is full of the new normal, but I don't know what is the new normal. Sorry. The new normal of September is not the normal which was envisaged in April 2020. And I have a nasty feeling, or a pleasant feeling, you choose the word as per your inclination. By the time we'll be looking at January 2021, normal would have changed. Therefore, there is an ever-changing normal, and if we have to have an education policy, it must prepare people to adapt to this change. And to adapt to this change, they must have some speed and some perspective. And I'm delighted to notice that the education policy has as its building block a modular approach to learning, exit and entrance system, as well as setting your own pace of learning and the other attributes which have been well discussed in such similar webinars. I'm not going to dwell upon it. Therefore, I see a synergy in the destination scenario, the framework of reference, the processes of traveling there, and the assumptions on which the education policy is supposed to move. Having said that, what is it that I consider important as the delivery mechanism of this education policy? First of all, it must result in a synergy between human resources and business, because business is the ultimate mover of processes, but human resources carry it on their shoulders, and it is ultimately the skill formation of human resources which delivers business, so the two must work together. The unlocking of the functional potential would be to enhance performance by partnering pay and performance. Many will remember the slogans of 70, and while Jaipuria Sahab was referring to the hoary and almost lyrical traditions of his family of 75 years in education, he will recall how in early 70s there were public slogans. I will not put it in Bengali because many of us may not know Bengali that well, but the slogan translated into English was, if you have given us a job, you will have to pay the salary. If you need work, you will have to pay overtime. In other words, Naukri deche, tankha chahi, kaam chahi, overtime dao. Now that will mercifully have changed because there would be a parity between pay and performance, and redesigning of the workplace because of technology and innovation. I think the education policy is eminently suited to deliver because it recognizes the need and the speed of learning, but that doesn't go far enough. Ultimately, there is little to disagree in the policy, but there is a lot to do in its institutional delivery. For example, if you come to the curriculum, we are not yet quite clear on what would be the benchmark of a curriculum. Therefore, I would like to use the shadow of a star under which Jaipuria Sahab has placed us to submit that any curriculum must have coverage, intensity, level, and practice compatible to international norms. Now, this I think is very important in drafting of the curriculum. Let me repeat for those of you who may not have got it on the first round. In terms of coverage, intensity, level, and practice, it must be internationally compatible. Teaching cannot be test-oriented, and the delivery of the curriculum cannot be unevenly delivered. All this requires a special orientation both of the faculty and the learner, and I'm glad again the House of Jaipuria has set up this star institution, and I'm happy to have an occasion to unburden myself of thoughts under its auspices to state that if knowledge was to multiply every 24 hours to double itself, education and skill linkage will be important. I think it is important in a situation like this to make a presentation of one's fundamental thoughts, and the moderator has indicated in the beginning that we have all about 10 minutes because there is a statement of Edmund Burke who, when asked to speak, asked how long will I have to speak for? And the organizer said, what difference does it make? He said, it makes a lot of difference. So he said, what if I gave you 5 minutes? He says, I would need a week to prepare. And what if I gave you 10 minutes? He said, I'll need 3 days to prepare. And what if I gave you 15 minutes? He says, I'll do it in 25 days. And what if I told you there are no limits? He says, anytime. So when you don't know what to say, you can go on talking endlessly, but when you have to pick and choose what you want to say, I chose to link the objectives with the processes with the content with the uniqueness, and uniqueness with 3 areas which I think we need to focus on: curriculum planning, curriculum delivery, and ultimately how to keep pace with expanding knowledge. I'm sure other distinguished panelists will be talking of research, digital hygiene, online education, and I'm sure they'll be worth listening to with even greater aplomb than we have done so far in this webinar. Thank you for now. Given an opportunity, I'd like to come in and respond to any queries or clarifications or further remarks as required. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a privilege to hear from you in the same structured and very power-packed, intense way, where there are hardly any scope for confusion. So you don't miss the words and make it as clear and sharp as possible. You very aptly covered and try to give an outline in very few words that the policy is very well drafted. There are hardly any disagreement to the policy intent, but the institutional delivery is a concern, and that will decide how long it take the policy to its desired destination. The curriculum design, the process of delivery, the uniqueness of the content, and then its blend with the practice is going to make a hell of difference, because the changing needs, as was being pointed out in the initial remarks by Japuria ji, and then you made it that the blend of practice and the content delivery and pace is going to decide what a quality of human resource we are going to produce all together as a whole, as a nation, through our academic process. Thank you very much. I would now take the privilege in requesting Sri Gautam Sinha ji for his initial remarks, and we have got the same time.
Thank you, Professor Mishra. I don't know whether I'm audible and visible. Am I audible?
Yes,
Am I
you are
audible?
very much audible and
Because
visible.
there seems to be some problem with the internet connectivity from your end.
Let us give it a try. I think it should work.
Professor Mishra, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Right, fine. Thank you and good evening to all.
Sinha sir, I think there is some network issue.
Very impactful vision, which has a very broad canvas. It has looked in depth and across a great width. First of all, it talks of creating an equitable society and a knowledge society based on education. Probably for the first time, our education system talks about the fundamental rights, duties, and the constitutional values are to be imparted through the seek inspiration, and I see a very close synergy between the World Economic Forum document on education 2015-19 on 21st century skills and 21st century education, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So in all, it's a very lofty document which has a great canvas, and it wants to do many things meaningful through education and sees education as the tool for lifting society. Something that I feel very closely close to my heart, and I see that the directions
I think, Mishra ji, there is some connection problem. Shall we move to another?
the education policy which I see coming out from the document. There are many other things, some I have apprehensions about, some I'm a little critical about, but more of that later. So this is more or less what I see as the highlights of this education policy. And beyond this, I would be repeating what my previous
Okay, I think Sinha sir is done. He has an unstable network. So we regret the inconvenience to the audience. But thank you very much, sir, for bringing out your initial view that this policy is unique in the sense that it seeks to build equitable knowledge society and emphasizes on fundamental values of constitutions. And it also is aiming to use education as a mean to live the society. So these were the distinctions that you brought from the policy. Thank you very much. Now we will request, we are indeed honored to request Sri Raj Singh Ji for his initial remarks. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra, Honorable Sri Jaipuria Sahab and distinguished co-panelists. Good evening to all the participants, which I can see in large numbers. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's very timely to discuss this topic when discussions are going on all over the country. It's also timely because all the technological advancements which we have discussed so far and the emerging role of teachers and students has been magnified and to some extent underlined by the COVID-19. And sometimes it seems there's a connivance between COVID-19 and national education policy being declared, so that this magnification helps in implementation of the provisions of national education policy. Some of the provisions which we have discussed and are there in the NEP 2020 are not new to us because the discussions have been going on for the last 4 to 5 years. And in an iterative process, we all have come to know about what is there in store. It's just a formal announcement of the policy. And it's because of this, in the last 3 to 4 years, whatever changes we have seen, which are brought by regulatory bodies like UGC, AICTE and others, I won't be wrong if I say that for the first time in the history of higher education, the statutory bodies are ahead of professors because they have not left much for us to criticize and blame. And therefore, the responsibility is squarely on all of us. How do we deliver as institutions and as faculty members? The subtopic given to me is related to research. And I'm also discussing this in the backdrop of that for the first time, I was looking at the remarks given by, was sent to me by Devinder, which somewhat indirectly provoked me to criticize some of the provisions of National Research Foundation, but I'll restrain myself. I'll not be in a complaining mode, but very interesting and intriguing to see that how IIMs will go into multidisciplinary mode. It's fascinating that we're discussing IIMs in this forum. Well, coming to my topic, I'm reminded of what Dr. R.A. Mashelkar once said. He said that research converts data and information into knowledge and consumes money, consumes resources. But it's the innovations that convert that knowledge back into money. And one of the limitations of our research ecosystem in the country has been that we didn't look at research and innovation together. But the new education policy, while it may have a lot of question marks in terms of implementation we're going to witness, it has many, many positives. And the positives are that for the first time we have an education policy which talks about creating a research ecosystem. Otherwise, we only talked about it. We gave slogans, and then it remained wherever it was. I don't have to go in terms of standing which are the other countries in terms of how many patents we filed. It also talks about some level playing field between private and public sector, that the funding and the decisions and monitoring and regulation of research activities will not be distinguished based on the ownership. So that is a very welcome kind of step. However, there are doubts cast on the implementation in terms of who will be the decision makers, what will be the time of funding, and what will be the competence of people who are sitting there. Without any offense, I must substantiate my doubts with an example. It was about 5 years ago, and I approached one of the state governments for the university which I was heading at that time to start a 5-year law program. And the experts had 2 members which are permanent for a period of 5 years, and 2 used to be on rotational basis. You'll be surprised to know that one of the experts who's permanent, he asked me that, well, when did India have 5-year LLB program? I have not heard about it. And I tell him, sir, it has been only about 25 years old. And I was the part of the first program, and it was launched in the year 1994. In front of me, he called one of the vice chancellors of national law schools and confirmed, and then said, well, if he is saying, then we grant you approval. Now, this is the expertise level and process of granting approvals and maybe the funding to ideas which are otherwise worthwhile. So we need to be careful about those kind of issues when the policy framework is put in place for funding for research. But more than the funding, I was looking at what are the ingredients of research in an institution, what are the prerequisites, what are the requirements when you want to enhance the output of research by an institution. And I could identify 8 of them. First one, organizational objectives and policies to contribute for new knowledge. I'm sure accreditation framework ensures that it doesn't require money. We will be made to work in that direction, and we have to just make some provisions in the policies of the institution. Second was the administrator's perception on research and publications. What does the management and the leadership and the administrators who control the processes think about research? That's very, very important factor. The third one is faculty motivation and targets for research publications. Not difficult, doesn't require any monetary support. You have to just frame a policy and frame targets for each faculty, and then of course handhold and provide support on the way so that the targets are met. The fourth factor was students' involvement in research-based projects. Now this is something very, very new, and the new education policy emphasizes on this. Whatever research we have, it's mostly at the postgraduate and doctoral level. Undergraduate programs have hardly seen any research in India, and it's high time we should start that. I'm sure the learning outcome-based framework will ensure this kind of teaching learning plan and the curriculum drafting. The next 3, also the fifth one is commitment and hard work with the proper strategy is self-explanatory, but the 3 support factors included funding, timely funding, institutional funding, and the other 2 supports are setting up of research centers and supply of good student research projects. And that's where all the collaborative efforts will come in. The research of the faculty will also have to be in the direction of creating these projects. Now, how the total framework of national education policy supports the research initiatives. That's what I wanted to highlight. In addition to the funding, National Research Foundation, which we have certain suspicion, but it's a very, very positive signal that we are here to create an ecosystem for research. So the first provision of the new education policy is to create a multidisciplinary ecosystem for research, wherein we are witnessing through the Industrial Revolution 4.0, a convergence between physical, digital, and biological worlds, which means the boundaries among disciplines are getting blurred or even eliminated. And therefore, a wider canvas for us to choose topics from and work on that in an interdisciplinary kind of environment, which is very, very fascinating. And that's what multidisciplinary environment will provide us. The demographic dynamics will further expand this canvas. and availability of AI and machine learning based tools will facilitate some of the topics to be taken for research. The second one is that the pedagogical initiatives in the new environment of blurred disciplinary boundaries, where from one discipline to other, you can't make out which discipline student belong to. It will provide us cross-fertilization of new ideas, which we never thought of. So this is a net addition to the ecosystem which new education policy will provide. The ecosystem of entrepreneurship has been created in the country through initiatives like Atmanirbhar Bharat, which was also announced around the same time. And if you have to achieve that, I think the research has to be seen integrated with innovation and entrepreneurship. They can't be seen in isolation. Unless we see this in integrative fashion, we may not be able to achieve much. In the post-COVID scenario, there's likely to be more time with the students and faculty. In fact, the institutions are worried that how do we deliver the jam-packed schedule which we used to have in the pre-COVID scenario, and the new normal which some of the panelist speakers referred to. In fact, we should not think of going back to normal, which has a tendency to pull like a magnet. I'm reminded of what Arianna Huffington said in April in one of the posts, and she said, we should not go back to the normal because normal wasn't working. And if we go back to the things the way they were, we would have lost the lesson. So maybe rise and do something different. I think it's a great opportunity for us where students will have time, and we in a way, I think should think deliberately to engage them in research and project-based assignments where you don't have to come to the campus. I think it's a great opportunity, and also it will help us overcome some of the weaknesses of a current education system which have been struggling or rather at times delaying to implement. Accreditations and rankings will weigh heavily on output based on research and innovation. If you look at academics and research account for about 60% marks, whether it's NBA or NAAC accreditation. So that will also, I think, force us to think on those terms as faculty and management. The pressure of attaining higher order learning outcomes, or HOTS, in the context of schools, higher order thinking skills, and the pressure of differentiation. I'll just take 30 seconds in explaining this. When we deliver online, some is synchronous, some is asynchronous. And in asynchronous, we use readily available contents. And if they're not proprietary, everybody's using the same contents, there'll be pressure on each one of us to differentiate our offerings, that why we are different from the rest. And that will have implications for the top line of the institution because fees will be affected, and there are so many other issues one has to deal with. And therefore, I think the policy highlights in clear-cut way that ultimately depends on the leadership and, of course, the individuals. I firmly believe that the quality of education depends on what kind of magic you create in that 1 hour or 2 hour you're in the class where nobody's influencing you. I think the same applies to even research. We have to really move ourselves out for the comfort zone. And to conclude, I would only say that these lines have borrowed from marketing discipline, but it applies to the current scenario that how do we push ourselves. It says, come on the edge, she insisted. I said, I will not, I may fall. Come on the edge, she insisted again. I said, I will not, I'm afraid. Come on the edge, she insisted again. This time I came, she gently pushed me and I could fly. I think that moving out of the comfort zone on behalf of each one of us is required. Otherwise, I call it a dream policy. We never thought that in India, we can have such a futuristic and forward-looking kind of policy. Rest during the question and answer session. Thank you once again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for elaborating and also in a way putting forward the suggestion that government is currently seeking. You put the onus on each one of us in the academics to take the responsibility of effective implementation and making the policy work. Additionally, you also emphasize that research is a resource consuming exercise despite it creates knowledge. However, the innovation is revenue generating. So research and innovation has to be clubbed together, and it is even better if it leads to entrepreneurship. So we need to have an ecosystem where research, innovation, and entrepreneurship go hands in hands. And also you provided a very well articulated step-by-step process of building research in an institution, which was the 8-step process. So I think the participants and audiences must be taking it along with them, and they will be benefited out of this. So this completes our first round of initial remarks. We would now take up the questions. We are already getting many questions in the question answer section of this webinar. We would request the audience to keep putting the questions, and we'll take each one of them one by one. If I could put up the question that this government is asking, this whole policy proposes to have the multidisciplinary. I think I'll have to take. Sinha sir is calling. Hello. Sorry, Sinha sir is not having a good network at his end. So that is what he was mentioning, and it is visible also. So the issue is that this policy proposes to have multidisciplinary campuses. And we have a legacy of having centers of excellence and institutions of eminence in terms of IITs, IIMs, Indian Institute of Statistics, Indian Statistical Institution and all. If we transit from that, the fear is that we may lose that distinction. So we all need to understand that how it is going to affect the overall transition and how it can be good or bad, what can be its implication. If I could request Vinayshil Gautamji to take up this question and enlighten us on this.
I don't know whether the single disciplinary character of an institution is fundamental to its eminence. I remember my early years in IIT, and I'm going back to the mid-70s, when I had all the options of moving from one institution to another. And the director was kind enough to ask me why I wouldn't move and why I would stay back. And the first argument which came to my mind, and I was still an assistant professor, was that there are at least 50, 70 faculty here which are as good as I am, or if not better, internationally comparable. Therefore, there is peer level pressure for performance. That would not have changed if IIT was not just engineering and science focused, as indeed it didn't change when later on it incorporated management. And at a certain stage, and this may not be known too well, about 16, 17 years ago, there was a serious proposal to include law as a subject matter of curriculum framework in IIT Delhi. The excellence of an institution comes out of the quality of research, teaching, dedication which the faculty and the community at large has to the processes of furthering the boundaries of knowledge and its practice. IITs, IIMs, the other institutions which have made competitive examination their gateways have become eminent because of the fairness of admission, career open to talent, and not because of a disciplinary bias. Given the constraints of time, therefore, I would like to sum up to say that the excellence of an institution is not a disciplinary issue. Just because all Marwadis are men, all men don't become Marwadis. So we should be very clear that if there are single disciplinary institutions which became excellent, to become excellent, you must become single disciplinary. It is a palpably fallacious logic. I can think of many, many multidisciplinary institutions, and a concluding thought at that. No discipline today is single disciplinary. I remember a chat with Raj Singh ji on an earlier occasion where we tossed this around and we recalled how multidisciplinarity is fundamental to understanding, and even civil engineering, there's nothing in common in deep ocean mining and public hygiene, and it's both civil engineering. So you must understand that the nature of knowledge has changed. So I think the sooner we stop debating this, the better for everyone else.
Thank you very much, sir, to making it so explicit that discipline is no guarantee or no determinant of becoming an eminent institutions. It comes from other area, and therefore we should move ahead and try to create better institutions rather than engaging in debate, which actually does not have great significance, whether it should be multidisciplinary or unidisciplinary. Thank you very much, sir. If I could put up the next question to Raj Singh ji, that on the governance front, the policy advocates that the institutions will be managed by independent boards, and the board will comprise of highly qualified individuals, and they will try to ensure the overall governance and regulation, and largely it will be based on self-governing principle where mandatory disclosure or self-disclosure will be key. And in that context, they talk of tight but light kind of regulations. Can you enlighten that? What are the consequences? Because who will be appointing the board members? How the board members will come on board actually? What is going to be the qualification? We would request you to throw some light on that.
Thank you for this question. The structure of boards and the governance system as it looks on paper is fantastic, because each one of us from education, particularly private sector, has been wanting more autonomy of functioning, more autonomy of what we do and how we do it. So I think that seems to be included in this provision. But how they'll be appointed, of course, as the guidelines roll out, we'll see whether it is in true sense autonomy being granted to institutions, or it is just for namesake wherein control will be somewhere else. But having said this, we need to learn something from the experience of last 15, 20 years, wherein we have been blaming the regulatory framework for not letting us work independently, for not giving flexibility to us. In fact, as I mentioned in my main remarks, that now it's other way around. They say that you bring quality, do whatever you feel like, we'll not check you. And therefore, there's a scope for so many pedagogical and pedagogical innovations which will help us to create learning opportunities for the students, which can be, of course, converted into learning outcomes. But the main issue of expanding the learning opportunity we have to create. The second aspect as management and leadership we have to keep in mind is that all the regulatory bodies, they have always prescribed norms and standards which are minimum, which means they prescribed the floor for us. And we were very quick to make them the ceiling. I think we need to resist from converting the floors into ceiling, rather take floor as floor and then move towards the ceiling, which has no limit. I think that's the approach which we are already free to adopt, the kind of flexibility we've been provided with. And the last, my perspective on the board structure would be, in fact, if we are strictly governed, if we are under the eyes of an external kind of board member, I think it's good for us. It has been proven that the survival of the fittest is the only thing which will remain. And finally, I would say, whatever the board structure, the survival of the institution is not ensured by AICT, not by UGC, not by Government of India, not by the state government. It's the management itself which has to ensure. I think we need to be financially wise as we manage our institutions. And in the times to come, I think our bottom line as well as top line will come under increased pressure. The questions will be asked now to each one of us that why should I pay the same fees when a large part of it is being delivered online, because still in India, we don't consider online as education. So I think it will take time before we change, but I think a lot to fall in line. And my hunch says that I think the government has the willpower and the intention to give autonomy based on the grading system through accreditation otherwise, which has already happened in case of, let's say, universities and institutions based on NAC and NBA framework. And this will continue, rather, it will continue more, I think, clearly, more vigorously. And we should focus on quality, autonomy will follow. That's my view on this.
Thank you so much for so well putting up this structure and its nuances. We hope that it will not be a kind of guided democracy where in the name of autonomy, things will be put up in a different way. We hope for real autonomy needed for institution to function, as Professor Gautam has also put up that the determinant of eminence come from autonomy and merit, culture of merit, and not by the discipline. So thank you very much. Professor Gautam Sinhaji, if I can put up the question to you, but before that I would like to check that your network is in order, it is in place. Gautam Sinhaji, can you hear us? I think we would not have. Sir, can you hear us?
He has muted himself.
Dr. Mishra, there
If I
is
can-
some big problem on our side, and my apologies, but there's very little that I can do about it.
That we understand. That we understand. This is where we are all constrained. But never mind. So I will take up this question back to Professor Vinaysheel Gautamji.
Just may what? I think, am I audible?
Yeah, I think it will work, sir. If you keep your video muted, so
Yes.
bandwidth will have little
Let's try
more
that.
flexibility. I think now I can have the chance to ask.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the question to you is that on one hand, government is talking of consolidation of institutions in terms of their number. We have large number of institutions, close to 1,000 universities and 40,000 plus affiliated and autonomous colleges. They are aiming to bring them to much lesser number and much bigger institutions. On the other hand, they are talking of achieving 50% of gross enrollment ratio by 2035, if you see in 15 years. My question is, if you are making the institutions more concentrated, will it have any implication on the accessibility, and will it have any consequences or adverse implications to the gross enrollment ratio? How do you see both together?
Dr. Mishra,
Yes, sir. I think the network is not stable.
yes, it's terrible actually.
Yeah,
Yeah, you are saying the question for me. Yes, please.
yes. Could you hear us? Could
Yeah,
you
I can at the moment, yes.
Yeah, so my question was that this policy proposes consolidation of institution and making it fewer but very large institutions. At the same time, it also aspires and aim to have gross enrollment ratio of 50% by 2035. Do you see both working together? Are these very realistic goals? How do you see that the fewer institution and the bigger institutions will help the achievement of 50% of CGR, gross enrollment ratio, by 2035?
Dr. Mishra, yeah, I don't know. It keeps coming and going. I couldn't even hear your question, so I'm so sorry. Can you just repeat it, please?
I'm saying that how the consolidation of institution will reflect on access and achievement of gross enrollment ratio of 50% by 2035.
It is going to be very agonizing for the participants.
Yes.
So my humble request is, instead of subjecting them to this torture, I think we should continue with whom Professor Raj Singh and Professor Vinaysheel, with whom the connectivity is good.
Yes.
Otherwise, it will be a torture for the audience. You know, it
No.
keeps coming and going. I'm so sorry. My
No,
apologies, but I'm not. I don't think it's working at all. So
not
I'll
a,
just
not
switch
a.
off, and I think you can switch it over to them
Yeah.
because
We appreciate you admitting it and you facilitating us. So thank you, sir. I will leave the question to either of my eminent panelists because it is a question which could not be taken up.
Let me
So I
make an
don't
effort.
want
Let me
to.
make an effort, sir, with your permission, Gautam sir. Uh, you know, this consolidation drive in terms of having larger universities and one, it emanates from multidisciplinary requirement. That unless you club different disciplines, you won't be able to have multidisciplinary kind of ecosystem. But if you look at the figures of last All-India Survey on Higher Education, there are about 35% colleges out of roughly 50,000 of all types of colleges we have, they run a single program. And out of which 83% plus are privately managed. So this is a problem of private ownership-based institutions. Among these privately managed colleges, 38% colleges run only B.Ed programs. And then similar kind of trends are there in case of management education, where single discipline programs are there. Another stunning factor is that about 17% colleges in the country have less than 100 enrollments. And only 4% colleges enroll more than 3,000 students. So now what happens with such small numbers, financial viability cannot come in the institutions. It's not an optimal use of resources. And therefore, we start compromising on the quality of education. So therefore, I think it's a kind of game where there are conflicting objectives. We perhaps want to ensure the financial viability of institutions so that they can deliver quality. I think it emanates from that, which according to me should be welcomed. And multidisciplinarity is so important that if you leave India out, one of our best institution features, I don't know where in the world ranking. And that is essentially single discipline, you know. And that happens to all the elite institutions which Sir talked about. Globally, the best institutions come from university systems. They are university departments and not standalone institutions. I think there's no debate on that. We have to have multidisciplinary environment and the institutions have to be seen as financially viable so that we can expect them to deliver quality. I think it emanates from that.
Let me come in on this.
Yes.
Raj Singh ji has brought his proverbial wisdom to a very complex topic. I'd like to build upon this. I was going through some of the questions and at least two of the participants have expressed surprise at my formulation. I would not have them feel disappointed because I think it is precisely this kind of debate which makes such webinars fruitful. I have had different experiences in institution building. And interdisciplinarity is a framework of mind. The institution gives an enabling environment. It doesn't learn from for you. For example, when I was planning the architecture of IIM Kozhikode, I got the same architect which created the India International Center, and I don't want to get into too many details. And he asked me, what is it that you have as a philosophy of an architecture of an institution like this? It's my job to be the architect, but the idea has to be yours. So we designed the spaces, the greenery, the water bodies. And then I said, create spaces in the corridor where people bump into each other. You move from your room to have a cup of tea and you meet somebody from the finance area and you happen to come from a marketing area, a person whom you would never normally meet, and you say hello. So the architecture itself leads to multidisciplinary pollination. And please do realize that today every major discipline draws upon the strength of every other discipline. It is the possibility which the institution provides. It doesn't do the learning for you. And please remember, even in an IIT framework, you have the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and it has been my proposition. For example, when I was consulting for IIT Assam, which is now in Guwahati, and it was supposed to be located elsewhere. I don't want to get into the history of that sort of thing. We made it very clear that only the best of the people from humanities and social science background came into the humanities department of IIT, because they would be meeting the best of civil engineers, they would be meeting the best of mechanical engineers, and if you got the second raters coming in, it won't do credit to humanities and social sciences. So one must understand the philosophical underpinning. Even today, the good management institutions, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun in talking about Shishir Jaipuria ji, when you talk to him, you get a broad view of education. You don't talk of just the balance sheet. Having said that, whereas we have been rightly looking at the strengths, there are enough blank spaces in the education policy which we need to look at. For example, we need to realize that learning requires emotional and mental spaces. Now, you don't expect the educational policy to elaborate upon that. It is for the institutions to create these emotional and mental spaces. Similarly, you have to incorporate in the rollout of the educational institution issues of digital hygiene, digital citizenship, and the recognition, which I am afraid is one of the major areas of silence of the education policy. The family is a co-educator. One learns as much from the background from where one goes back from the institution as in the institution itself. Therefore, the institutions will have a responsibility for creating a far more holistic, the popular word these days is ecosystems. Everything is supposed to have an ecosystem. So creating the learning ecosystem today would be a responsibility not just of the institution, but on co-partnership with all the stakeholders in the educational process. And that, I think, concludes the debate on what is the kind of pollination we expect of single institutions, multidisciplinary institutions, the size, business. A lot of these questions will be answered as you go down the road.
Thank you very much, sir, for bringing in the perspective of emotional and mental spaces and family as a learning unit. Because after completing the learning in the institution, one has to go back to the family, and there the real test and reflection comes. To take a clue from that, if I could put up the question to you, sir, back that this NEP talks that the higher education institutions across the India need to have medium of instruction of the programs in local and Indian languages. When we are talking of this current context, how do you see it to be feasible in terms of the quality content being available and the quality resource being available at the higher education? We are talking of higher education context. So, Professor Gautam, sir, if you can throw some light on that.
Dr. Mishra, you almost provoked me, because this is one of the most popular fantasies of learning systems in India. And we are not talking of foreign languages or other languages. We are talking of English, for which for us foreign is English. And for those of us who have traveled, and you don't have to travel very far. If you are in London, you have to cross that little channel where is Bay of Biscay and cross over to France to know that even for getting water, you have to speak in French. They don't recognize English. And you get into Germany and you are lost with your English. It is only in India we believe that English is an international language. Yes, English is spoken in the United States, it's spoken in Australia, it's spoken in English. But let me tell you, Indian English is not understood in America. Because we say thank you when we meet, congratulate. And the other day I was listening to Shashi Tharoor of how many words there are in English of entirely Indian origin, which nobody understands, save the Indians. So there is a lot of serious work on that. Please recognize that speaking English does not make you an internationalist. That's the bottom line. If you look at the largest number of speakers of a language in the world, it is Chinese today. And whether you are pro-China or anti-China, and there is There's no point in getting into that kind of discussion. Language does not have a flag. Chinese is spoken in Taipei, in Taiwan. It is spoken in Singapore. That doesn't make Singaporeans Chinese. Similarly, these language dominance of Portuguese, Spanish, French is an imperial legacy. I went to UK when I was 6 and I began my education in UK. And believe me, my father ensured that at home I was reciting and memorizing the Sanskrit Encyclopedia Amarkosh, because he saw the danger of my speaking English with that typical Oxford slang, which made me very acceptable there, but totally unfit for higher brand of learning. Because there is a lot of knowledge in Sanskrit which is not available in English. And if I had time, I would have elaborated upon it. But in India, we have equated scholarship with English. Nothing can be farther from the truth. In fact, our obsession with English has prevented us access to other source languages like French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and even in India, there is such a lot of scientific knowledge in Sanskrit and elsewhere. And if anybody is interested, they can write to me and I'll send them bibliographies and listings which will establish that you should be open to all languages. I have nothing against English, but multi-linguistic competency is the root of scholarship. For example, you go to Cambridge, Oxford, you have to know a classical language to be able to make sense of your doctoral work there. It is only in India that we have taken language to such points of discussion that you can have a mass movement for or against a language. It just doesn't make sense. Forgive me for saying, and I am entitled to my own views, though I don't insist anybody else agree with it. But if after putting in 50 years in the profession, I don't have any views, then I must have wasted all my years. You can disagree with me, but I expect to be heard on where I come from. So language is not an issue. The more languages you know, the more you are open to knowledge, and that is the grist mill of scholarship.
Thank you so much, sir, for putting it in perspective that language and foreign language and local language, all the languages are equal, and multilinguistic is the way to scholarship. Thank you very much. Professor Raj Singh, sir, if I could build on your question, this education policy, proposes that it will offer equal opportunity to public sector and private sector institutions. But you don't find great mention that what can be the incentives to the private sector institutions. Government has the onus to facilitate education to all as a right to education and otherwise also as a nation development. But how do you see that private sector will have its motivation and incentives to get into this space and contribute?
Difficult question. I don't know if you are meaning incentives and benefits in terms of financial benefits. That may not be a level playing field, but I would weigh the biggest incentive to the private sector is a free hand in designing and delivering the programs. I think that one simple kind of criteria of level playing field can do wonders for us. In any case, by structure, we do not get any financial assistance because the way we have been established. However, if we can get certain grants and support in terms of research and funded research projects, maybe conducting conferences and seminars, and also perhaps sharing of some of the resources. Like in recent past, you must have seen some of the National Digital Library kind of things or other databases which have been extended to public and private equally. I think there are big benefits. While I do understand your concern, seeing it on paper and actually happening on ground, there's likely to be a lot of difference. If I have seen those kind of situations where there's equal number of vice chancellors in a meeting from public and private sector and the seating arrangements are different. So now that kind of mentality will take time to really go away. But one thing I'm very, very happy about that private sector, which now has almost 76% enrollment, 76, 77% enrollment, is already a dominant sector, and you can't ignore it. So if I go by purely the intentions shown in national education policy, I see more and more level playing field for them, because it's the private sector which has pushed innovation, which has pushed new ways of teaching. It's the private institutions. I was talking to Sir in the previous discussion that, all the collaborations we have had, despite absolutely unclear regulatory framework in India, private institutions went ahead and entered into collaboration, whether they were right or wrong, legitimate or illegitimate, legal or illegal, I don't know, whatever you want to term them. But the kind of rub-off effect they had on our education system is phenomenal. In fact, we were equally comfortable in terms of talking like outcome-based education, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary kind of topics, which we had not heard in public sector. So I think the dominance of private sector, like many other industries, I can give you a parallel of maybe insurance industry, where LIC made a lot of noise that we will lose market share. And you will be surprised with next 5 years, their market share doubled, because private sector created awareness. And they showed the value of insurance. Same way, I think private sector has really pushed the public sector at large. I'm not saying of the elite institutions, they still remain elite, and without offense to anybody. So I think this incentive is good enough, and the government can no longer ignore it. They will have to extend even the financial support in different areas equally to private sector. In terms of graded autonomy, if you see, it started happening, though initial hiccups were there. The government announced autonomy, graded autonomy based on the NAAC score, but it took some time before it came in. Same is the case of, let's say, when a private university comes into existence and you want to get it listed. So there's a separate process for private sector, separate process for the government universities, which doesn't make any sense, And unfortunately, in our country, whenever we talk about quality, we talk only about private sector. Public sector and quality is not discussed at all. I think the time has come where both are being discussed. So these are very encouraging changes in the environment, even though I don't expect it overnight, but we're moving in the right direction. A lot of incentives will be there.
So we appreciate your positivity, and we hope that the contribution of private sector for 70% or more of enrollment, total enrollment, will be respected and seen as a positive contribution, and government will give it a due consideration while making the regulations and all. We have come towards the end of this panel discussion. Professor Gautam sir, if I could take up one question with you, with your permission. The last question.
Please.
Sir,
Dr. Mishra, it should not be from outside the syllabus.
with your kind of journey in academics, I think syllabus will have to be redesigned.
Plus, you're also going for examination reform, sir.
Exactly. You can only create the syllabus which can be out of syllabus for you. For us, it may not be possible. Can I take the question?
Yes, please.
Sir, this new education policy is talking of lot of appreciation to Indian values and Indian ethos, human values, emotional space, mental space, and variety of things, and trying to create a national pride, which is very good, because that is also the duty of education, to educate people about the national pride and cultural heritage. We have a history of large number of students going abroad for study. In fact, that has also become social status as the learning of English language you just celebrated. Do you see that this new education policy will be able to bring any change at that front? At least the Indian scholars prefer and take pride in working and studying in India. And if more of foreign students can travel and foreign scholars can travel to India, that will be a great change. That will be redefining of Indian education acceptability. So,
Dr. Mishra, it's a pity you put your finger on a raw spot, and that also towards the conclusion of this very, very lively debate, and I don't think I'll disappoint you.
thank you, sir.
In India, scholarship is always based on Western recognition. with no disrespect meant to either of the two luminaries which I'm now going to name, Dr. Das Gupta and Dr. Radhakrishnan, both were elaborators of Indian philosophy. One went to Oxford, became a reader, and look at his career. The other stayed back in India and taught Indian philosophy, and look at his career. I don't want to compare, but even if I wanted, I can't conceal the facts of their careers. And I leave it to you to come to your conclusion. When I set up two of the IIMs with which I am identified, I was given a serious advice: incorporate in the detailed project report that the project director will go out and recruit. Where else? I won't name the country. In our value system, nothing is worthwhile till it is branded from Timbuktu, that is from outside India. Now you can well argue we haven't developed enough institutions of our own with eminence. That's not true. I could again cite to you any number of instances by dozens where Indian institutions have recognized the inner worth and risen to their stature. Indian Institute of Science comes easily to mind. It has a pre-independence track record. It has rolled out during independence time. But there is something wrong with our mutual celebration. I don't want to walk that road because the facts are too well known. We have great difficulties in admiring each other's work unless we see a payoff by that admiration. And then, of course, everyone goes all over to admire, expecting returns. The education policy, if it runs into bad weather, will not be because it's a bad policy, but because too many people are too determined to see too many strengths. It's like the Rafale aircraft. There was a quip going around the social media. The two French scientists and technologists were talking to each other, and they said, we didn't realize Rafale had so many strengths. If we had known it, we would have priced it even higher. Now look at the way we have gone about discovering all the strengths of Rafale. Maybe they are all there. I'm not commenting on it. But this deep-rooted sense of seeking acceptance abroad before you are accepted in India, I don't want to elaborate on that any further. I would like to end with a question. You have asked me questions. You have asked Dr. Raj Singh, Dr. Gautam Sinha also. You popped some questions to him. The question is, name me one Indian mother-in-law who does not dream of having a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law who is not at least having a green card, a residency permit, or a passport somewhere abroad. That's the dream of the Indian mother. And I can't question her choice. It is there in every family. The way education system will roll out is first self-respect and ability to understand your own strengths and keeping yourself open to learning from everyone, not selectively. Now that you don't need an education policy to tell us. Ultimately, the education policy will be as good or as bad as people like you, me, and people listening to this conversation and elsewhere will make it.
Thank you so much for bringing such a kind of understanding, clarity of the understanding that how we are misplaced in terms of our references and valuing the merit. So thank you very much. It has been a great honor to have this lively debate. Despite Professor Gautam Sinha has some challenge, but we appreciate his time. I wish it would have lasted for much longer because it doesn't feel like we have spent 1.5 hours. It seems as if it has just started. I'm sure that our participants must have got enriched and they would be looking forward to many more such sessions. To conclude it, I would request our my own colleague, Dr. Davinder Narangji, to please conclude the session and propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. After having a lot of insight from our learned speaker, Professor Vinayshil Gautam, Professor Raj Singh, and Professor Gautam Sinha, and not the least of, with the beginning, our respected chairman, sir. It's really, enlightful to talk on the national education policy, though we are able to only touch, the few glimpses of this policy, and still, as we all know, is only the policy, still action point is yet to come. And we are maybe on some point we are speculating, but yes, government has to devise the full, plan on this. But if I talk about the policy which we are presuming, one of the major fundamental principle of the policy is to taking the student to develop a rootedness and pride in India and its rich, diverse, ancient and modern culture and knowledge system and the traditions. That is the, this policy is, focusing. We will now move to a multidisciplinary and holistic education across the sciences, social sciences, arts, humanities, and sports for a multidisciplinary world in order to ensure the unity and integrity of the knowledge. We will now emphasize on the conceptual understanding rather than the rote learning and learning for the examination as we have in the traditional system. Creativity and the critical thinking will encourage logical decision making and innovation that could be, the feature of this new policy. The national education policy has a major focus on harnessing the talent and potential of the Indian student, which we perceive. This has been a much required educational reforms, and as an educationist, I am happy to share that the education policy lays special emphasis to make India more powerful, to take it to the new heights, and to empower the Indian citizens. Definitely, Indian student will be able to play a constructive role in the nation building. A scientific way has been introduced to meet the shifting paradigm of the corporates. A student will now have a step-by-step practical knowledge and not just the conceptual knowledge. After listening to the all the stalwarts, I am indeed sure that all of our audience have a clear clarity on the the vision which is laid down through this policy, the significance of the clause which has mentioned, and the relevance of the new education policy as a overall. We have been fortunate enough to listen from a renowned speaker who have really notable in their field. I really extend my gratitude towards all the speakers of the day, and I really thankful. And as if I start with the Professor Vinayshil Gautam, they have mentioned clearly with the the function of the policy, and they said the destination of through this policy, that is very important, where we'll reach, and that is an important aspect. And as being a academician, I am also 100% agree with Dr. Gautam because he touched a important part, that is the curriculum, because in the education, this is very important, the content which we are creating and the content which we are delivering. That is the most important part of the success of any student, or creating a knowledge for the student. So that is really a big challenge. But if this policy is focusing to create a good curriculum designing and of course the delivery, then definitely will succeed in the objective which is set by this policy. And also, I'm very glad to hear, this is the second time from the Professor Vinayshil Gautam, that he mentioned the fantasy of the languages. Yes, even I know, as he mentioned, being a, despite the brought up in the system where he mentioned he had this education from the UK, he has a, great, I would say, love for his own language and as well as the other language. As he mentioned, this is important to know the multi-language because it will give you a plethora of the knowledge, and that is very important because the creation of the knowledge through the modes which you have, that is very important to instead of having only one, saying the knowing of the international language English, that is not very important. Now coming on the Professor Raj Singh, as I know him, since long, and Raj Singh is a very, vocal on various aspects, and he's mentioned clearly on the first part of the research. As we all know, research is very important for any, any academic institution and the nation as a whole. So really, he mentioned step by step and the step which is required to make a successful or a research oriented academic institution. So he given emphasis on there is a need to set up an ecosystem in the research. And definitely there are a lot of challenges, as he rightly mentioned. The funding is a major challenge for a good research. But definitely we need to start from the somewhere, and definitely we'll get the desired result. And he also mentioned on the autonomy of the institution and the broadly the structure and the broad mechanism how it will be worked. That is really knowledgeful for us. And the debate really, can go, go up to any long. There is a need to focus on the few points which is really important to take the better outcome for this policy. So at the last, I would like to say that the all positive quotes are not very positive, because the positive is your adaptability. So indeed, the policy that has got a completely this policy has got a completely revamped structure as well as a new outlook. We will face a lot of obstacle in the transitioning from this existing system to the multidisciplinary system, but definitely we will learn and we will adapt and we will work for a better future for self, for the generation to come, and for our country. So with this, I once again I thank to all my panelists, co-panelists, our respective chairman, and not the least the participant and from the teaching fraternity, from the corporate, from the student, those who are listening us. I really thankful from the Jaipuria. They have listened us, and definitely I know they have got the knowledge on this proposed policy. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Narayan sir, and we are indeed grateful to Professor Gautam Sinha ji that despite all the challenges, he remained with us, and his presence was a kind of strength. It was an invisible hand in a way that was giving us a moral support to take the discussion forward. And as the discussion was so lively and so enriching, I'm very sure that we all are concluding that today's working day with a great learning, and it is going to keep us charged and fresh while we go home, and it will help us thinking in a much clearer and confident way to take the policy forward. We are indeed grateful to participants who stayed all through us, and the number went somewhere to 350 to close to 400, and throughout even now it is 257, which is a big number. So that itself is a testimonial that the discussion was enriching and very enlightening. We are grateful to all of you, and we look forward to many more discussion under the banner of STAR as well as Jaipuria School of Business and Jaipuria Institute of Management. On behalf of the Jaipuria Group of Institutions, I once again thank you all, and we look forward to connecting more frequently on much lively and much topical issues. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaskar.